Rob Kaplan is just one of those people with a reputation you aspire to have. It's one of those, you know Rob Kaplan? Yeah, love Rob kind of things. Perhaps the most notable characteristic Rob possesses are his approachability and his sense of humor. He has a way of keeping things light, not making you feel like you're an idiot, all while dropping some serious knowledge. We met in person just before Wind Up San Francisco when I dropped by somewhat as a cold call to introduce myself, say hello, and ask if he'd ever want to be on the show. Well, as fate would have it, here we are. So without further ado, here's our conversation. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard Age Podcast. Mr. Rob Kaplan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I honestly don't know where to start this other than, can we give folks the Cliff's Notes of like the history of Topper? Like what's, if you had to narrow it down to like the 30 seconds or less story, where does Topper begin for you?
Two brothers named Topper start a watch company in 1940. In less than 10 years, they sell the company. The descendants of, the ancestors of Russ and Rob Kaplan buy said watch company, mall stores, no mall stores, downtown destination in Burlingame store, and a lot of watch collecting and a lot of special editions.
Amazing. So
that was as succinct as I could do it.
That's fantastic. No, that's fantastic. I like it. Because I'm sure you're utterly sick of telling the story. So, but
it started with two brothers, the Topper brothers, who lasted less than 10 years and failed and sold it to the Caplans.
So did they sell it for reasons they weren't doing well? They didn't sell it for reasons to get out.
That whole part of the history is like, even before my grandfather got involved in the business. My great uncle is the one who did that deal.
I see.
My grandfather was working in the he followed my great uncle from Boston, which is where he was from. He was just a very successful businessman, and he actually first started working for my great uncle. This is Arthur Caplan we're talking about, but he started working for him first in, I think, women's clothing in Los Angeles, and then my great uncle purchased the Topper stores, and then he moved up to San Francisco to help run that.
Okay, so there were multiple locations at one point.
Yeah, so Topper started out as sort of like Americana stores, like in Merced and Modesto. So very mid-America stores.
Yeah, Central California.
Yeah.
Got it.
American graffiti is what I always think about when I think about Modesto in the 50s.
Sure. Interesting. Okay, so when you, Rob, enter the business, are you 14 years old working in a mall, or like what did you have a job before this?
So my first job at Topper was actually when I was 14 years old. And I think that we had a central office in Millbrae that we ran the stores in Modesto were set out of. So we're talking mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had just changed banks. And I think there had to be a stamp on every account receivable that we had from the bank. And my first job was spending 6 weeks putting this new bank stamp on like thousands and thousands of invoice. So I just remember turning a page and going like over and over.
Unbelievable.
And then the next year, I worked in our closest mall store. And that was in a dead shopping center called San Antonio Shopping Center. And it was a really, really struggling mall, like really struggling. We didn't have a lot of customers. It was right next to, I think there was a Walden Books, and there was a place called the Diamond Center.
Okay.
A guy had a commercial where he would sing how he was a credit man, and the ladies would carry him around I'm a soul man. But anyway, it was and so I had a lot of time to flip through catalogs. And I'd say flipping through watch catalogs and looking at the watches that we had, um, and having a lot of downtime was what started my watch love.
That was like your education, I guess. But so what were the brands that you were carrying in the 80s?
Okay. So my brother, um, so we're talking like this must have been like 1986 when I
Cool.
had my first summer job. Maybe 87 because I graduated in 90, 91, maybe 88, somewhere around there. Um, High end was Omega and Tag Heuer. Um, we actually were, my dad put an Omega in the early 60s. So we are probably one of the longer standing independent Omega dealers in the US. I mean, now, of course, we have boutique status with Omega. Back then, it was probably, it was, like a little, probably 3 foot case.
Yeah.
Um, Tag Tag Heuer, Omega, Seiko, Citizen. There was a Swiss line of Seiko called LaSalle, Seiko LaSalle,
Okay.
which they tried marketing in the 80s that we had. And oh, um, there was like a little pocket watch company, uh, Calibri. We sold Calibri pocket watches. They were like $90 to $180, really gold plated. I remember there was one I really liked that had like a semi truck on the front of it, very classy. There was another good one that had hunting scenes. I mean, Calibri, I mean, God rest their soul. Will you pour one out with me for Calibri pocket watches?
I got no liquids near me, but I will
Just
later.
metaphorically.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
RIP.
And they had
Um,
and lighters. We sold lighters. We sold really nice Calibri lighters. So they were dual threat pocket watches and lighters.
so I'm assuming the bulk of your business was quartz or no?
Um, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure.
Do you miss those days at all? Like being in stores at that age selling that, because the reason I ask the question is because like when I was in high school, I my aspirational watch, I mean aside from my grandfather's Rolex, right, was like my Swiss Army watch. So that was like my high school graduation gift, my Victorinox officer's ratchet bezel, right?
Right.
However, is there any part of you that misses the days of whatever your aspirational watch was when you were 17?
Well, I feel like that's a really smart question because I feel like even if you look at the way people nickname hype watches, they're
Mm-hmm.
always trying to get back to that feeling of before you had much and um sort of recapturing that feeling of wanting something. Um I have been thinking a lot about my first car lately. um
Oh,
and
purely in preparation of this podcast, I'm sure.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but I've been thinking about just what I was like back then and what I wanted. I never would want to go, back to the 80s. And sometimes I can think with a little bit of fondness towards those days when I was, flipping through those catalogs. But I just try to be present. But I do like, especially if I visualize it, I can remember what it was um, like just cleaning the counters, hoping somebody would come and just flipping through those catalogs. I think about it and I
Right.
do get a little bit nostalgic. Um, and I still have my first watch that I saved up for, like you're talking about.
Really? What was it?
It was a Tag Heuer 3000.
Oh man.
So the 2000 made it for years. It was very, very popular in the catalog in different forms from like the 80s to the 2000s. Um, Before they called things Aqua Racer. I guess it would sort of it was a predecessor to the Aqua Racer. And the
I see.
3000 was like a more octagonal shape that they tried as a more luxe version of the 2000. Wasn't quite as nice as the 4000. And if you got the 6000, that was like the top of the line. But my
Right.
brother had the 2000, and so for some reason I kind of wanted to one up him and get the 3000. But I really didn't know, what one upping meant at the time.
Sure.
To me then, like stealing gold was just pivotal. I had to have some gold plating, 1980s gold plating on my watch. That was really important.
That's amazing. I'm assuming your brother's older.
My brother's older. He's 13 years older than me.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. Significant. Yeah. Well. Yeah. You gotta one up him for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um.
But
So
he had the vision to put in Tag Heuer, which was I think at the time one of the coolest sport watches you could get in the 80s.
yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
And it's got to have a
So
big, and they're big in automotive, so I'm sure there's a big crossover with Tag Heuer and your audience.
yeah, 100%. But that's great that I guess if you're 17, he's 13 years older. He's 30. So he had quite a bit of autonomy as far as like purchasing power.
Yeah, he bought um like the cool up and coming watches and added them to our collection. I mean, it wasn't like it is now where we, will go after independence for because our audience is so different and this just the level of sophistication with different brands is so different where we're always shopping. But he also there's another brand that we sold, I just remembered. There was an Italian brand that was like a less expensive version of Tag called Sector. Have you heard of Sector?
I don't know. I'm not
Their
familiar.
tagline was "No limits."
Of
Um,
course.
and they were really big in Italy. And I remember when I went on a trip in Italy in like the early 90s, and in every single like store, you would see Sector watches.
Interesting.
So we sold those in the late 80s and early 90s. And I guess that they did find some limits ultimately.
I was about to say, it sounds like their reach was a limit because I'd never heard of them.
Yeah,
But
apparently they found some limits.
what's something about being a part of a family business that you think might surprise people?
Um, I think that probably the biggest thing I would say is based on how busy we are, the amount of time that can go by without any kind of traditional like family talking or squabbling. Like when I think of a family business, I imagine, a bunch of people sitting in a circle, like thinking and talking and in making, their plans or getting upset about something or I just am, but we just don't have much downtime for that. So even like the meetings we used to have, I guess now because we've gotten a little bit bigger, they now have. It's just everything's become more structured. So I
Mm,
would say the thing that would be surprising is even like our planning meetings have become more structured. That would be then, and there's not as much informal informalness as maybe there was in the 80s 90s. I just remember like when I was first in the business, like my dad, my brother and I would just we would have a lot of time just talking about things. And I think that's one of the things that I think people probably sort of, I mean, so you got two real questions. Like, do you want to be part of like a big boat where everybody's like doing their job on the boat and the boat is like moving forward, or do you want the feeling of just sort of hanging out on the boat and cruising?
right.
I would say if you're just, it's never the second one. Like when it was the second one, it was always like because things were slow.
Right.
I think I think it's I think the thing I would say is our goals of keeping things forward and being proactive and making sure we're addressing all the customer needs, understanding the new product, making sure our experience is good as possible. Like all of those things tend to be, I imagine, not that different than how it is in corporate structure companies
Right.
as companies get bigger.
So, do you feel
Does
any
that make any
added
sense?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Do you feel any added pressure being a family business given the legacy and that sort of thing?
Um, I'd say since I was young, anything that I do, no one will ever put any more pressure on me than I put on myself. So
Yeah.
not really. I mean, I feel like the pressure that I always feel, no matter what I'm doing, is pretty constant.
Yeah.
So
I feel the same way about what I'm doing.
yeah, like it doesn't like I can't imagine like if you look at like the quality. Like I'm looking at one of your hats right now. I'm looking at just the quality of the material and the mesh and the design and like the way the logo sewn into the front hat. And I can imagine that if your grandfather started the company instead of you, I don't think you would want the hat to be any better. I think you want it to be as good as it can because that's how you're wired, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I you know, I th- I think about um definitely I sometimes think back about all that my dad did to put us in the position where we are in now and my grandfather before him and you know I like to think that they'd be happy with what's happening now. I think about that, but and sometimes
Yeah.
I visualize what they would have done for problems, but I really don't feel you know any pressure because to live up. I just try to be present and do the best I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I just recorded with Gabe Riley,
I know.
and he says hello.
What up, Gabe?
We were we were talking about just kind of how, well, I guess me more so than him. Actually, it was entirely me, not him. About how there's oftentimes when I look at things that I've worked on and worked so hard on that I very often only notice the mistakes
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what I got right. Because I mean, what you get, I mean, it's kind of like learning what not to do is often a better lesson than what to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so does that apply to you at all?
Oh,
Like,
100%. 100%. And like, and I think about, I mean, it's probably easier when you think about things. Do you think more about like this in terms of the products you launch, or do you think about it in terms of your podcasting? Like what specifically, or do you think about things in general, or like probably easier if we narrow it down a little? Like we're
well,
talking about like
yeah, for
releases, or
for me personally, it's product, or like, I mean, well, Gabe and I were also talking about home renovations, and so like I designed my kitchen, right? I just sketched it all out on a piece of paper and I had it made. I did not do the labor. However, there were some mistakes made, and now that's all I see when I walk in the kitchen. So,
do you know what that reminds me of?
what's
My
that?
my godfather, who was a internist, Dr. Bertram Solomon, he had this pool, and he talked about how he had the pool cover that he would roll out, and there was always an inch and a half gap where the pool cover didn't quite perfectly fit.
Unacceptable.
And he said, I realize this makes absolutely no logical difference in anything, but for some reason, when I look at this pool cover and I think about that inch and a half gap,
It's not covered.
it's not covered, but it also keeps me from thinking about anything else that might be really bothering me. So I can just think about that gap. And I like thinking about that gap. So I
That's
always thought that
cool.
was interesting.
That turns it on its head. I like that. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so what's something that Topper could get better at, in your opinion?
What can we get better at?
Well, like that you notice, right? Like, what's the mistake that you always notice, for example?
Um, on product?
Is there a cover that just doesn't cover the case line entirely when you close up at night?
Yeah, exactly. I think um so what can we get better at? I think I think the big one of the biggest challenges that we have at this moment is, you've got a customer on the phone, you have a customer in the store. The customer on the phone deserves an answer. The customer in the store is right in front of you, also deserving an answer. And so to me, uh, and then the person who's walking by both the phone and the customer has a repair in their hand that they're trying to get to the repair coordinator who's trying to call the repair coordinator. And so I think the greatest challenge is when you have multiple things happening at once, trying to have the grace to help all three of them in a way that they all seem present, validated, and important. And that is, I think, the greatest struggle of of Topper when I think about it.
Do you do you have a ranking system?
God no. I mean, the person who's in the store, um, if they're gonna wait at all, they're gonna have to get an explanation as to why they're waiting. But they all matter. That's the thing is, um, they all 100% matter. I mean, that repair could be a repair of somebody who's already committed to getting, some, whether they've got something from you or not. I mean, it could be like a family treasure. The person on the phone could be stuck at home because UPS didn't deliver their package, and they don't know if they should be waiting for it or not because there's a lag time in the tracking that they're seeing and where the watch actually is. And the person in the store, um, might have a meeting to get to. So that's the thing, is you don't have the information to know which of the, because if you're just walking by, you will really only know which of the three needs to be dealt with first if you heard all three, which you can't do.
Right. Right.
But what was your ranking?
Well, just in terms of dollars, I think, coming from a car sales background, number one point of a phone up is to get them in the dealership, right? So you're automatically going to treat somebody in front of you with priority. Somebody on the phone isn't in front of you, but they could be,
Right.
right? So get off the phone, come see me. You'll get more priority treatment. Now, granted, this sounds like a jerk type of situation that I sound
Right.
like a jerk. However, there's only one of me and three of them, so I have to make a decision, right? So it's like, so then the guy with the repair is already spending money with you, for sure. The guy who's not, who's simply in front of you, you don't know if they're buying something or not, right? So it's like, okay, do you take the repair guy while he's being dealt with the repair? Then you help the next person in front of you, and then maybe call the other guy back or woman,
So that's the real question, is
right?
does a sales paradigm of ranking these things, is that what Topper is?
Exactly. Right. Right.
And I answer hopefully not.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny that you asked me, like, if I'm like holistically thinking about
Yeah,
the
think about it
mistakes,
holistically.
or am I thinking about the mistakes only with regards to product, right? Because it's like I'm not motivated by money in terms of money. I just need money to keep
The brand going.
the brand going, because what I'm motivated by is creating products and sharing them with the world, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not really like if I were a billionaire, I don't know. Like my brand would probably be very different because I could afford to do many different things and at different volumes and at different costs as a result. But um, what do you think is Topper's main motivation?
The experience, that
Right.
people have a good experience, and the
Yeah.
sales will come from that.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
if we focus on the sales, you might get sales in the short term, but if you don't think overall about the experience and have that be the guiding factor,
Sure.
then you're just another store.
Yeah. No, 100%.
One of our
Um,
one of our best people we have left the car business, where he was excellent, excellent car salesman, because he wanted a company that focused on A, his number one love, which is watches, and B, didn't have that type of, I would call it, dollar triage that you're describing.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a fair explanation. That's a really good analogy.
So yeah, but our lights have to stay on too, but
Yeah.
it's anyway, so that's the biggest challenge, I would say, where,
Mhm.
where we are now, is is making sure multiple people are all helped as good as can be.
That sounds like a very positive problem.
Well, we do our best.
A far cry from the shitty mall from the 80s with
With
no
no
customers.
customers.
Um, Legacy versus enthusiast driven businesses. Where do you rank you along that scale?
Can you define both a legacy business and an enthusiast
Well,
business?
family, right? So you're kind of a legacy business given that it's multi generational,
Right.
but an enthusiast business may just be like driven by enthusiasm.
I It's funny. I don't I don't know. how different they are because
Like Standard H is an enthusiast business, obviously, because like I didn't have lineage already in this role.
right. I mean, we have the lineage on the door. I mean, the logo says Topper 1940, but I think of our when I think of ourselves, I think of ourselves as an enthusiast business, not a legacy business.
Cool.
Because if you're not treating people and embracing them in their hobby and being ready to listen to them and give them an experience and making the thing that they care about more interesting, then who cares if your grandfather started a mall store in 19, you know, 51 in downtown Modesto to go with the other stores? I mean, what difference does it make?
Sure.
I mean, it shows a commitment, but it's sort of like when you hear like CEO, like I remember like there Ariel Adams, was told me about we were talking about um oh we're talking about Vermont, and and we were talking about the English brothers and what great guys they were. And I remember he said to me, he's like, yeah, they're absolutely great guys, but that wouldn't matter if their watches weren't cool. And so that's what I think what I think about, like, if like you can't rest on anything that was done in the past.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's really fair. As far as brand choice goes, obviously you spoke to your brother contributing to like bringing tag on and such.
Uh-huh.
What percentage of the brands that you carry now have always been there, or like, and then the percentage of like new stuff?
Oh, since the one I got involved around the year 2000.
Okay.
Maybe we have 5 brands
At the time.
that are still here. We had Omega, we had Longines. Uh, what else did we have? I mean, we didn't even have I mean, right now, Seiko and we're so known for Seiko and Grand Seiko, but we didn't sell Seiko until like 2017, and
Oh,
we started
wow.
selling Grand Seiko in 2013. But we very few. I mean, Omega, Longines.
So what's the brand count up to now? How many brands?
I don't know, in the 20s.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's a lot.
And we also don't sell tag. We stopped selling tag in 2011, which was like 3 remodels ago.
Okay.
But most of the brands, that we're known for, I mean, we certainly didn't have when I got involved. And in picking brands is something that my brother and I always do together. So it's not like I've taken that from him. I mean, that's adding brands and deciding what the assortment should be and what it's like when people walk in is one of the funnest parts of the business, I think.
What do you look for in a brand in order to even get them on your radar as far as being a stockist?
Couple of things. Number one of the best signs that a brand is going to be incredibly popular is if it starts getting traded in a lot. Because if it starts getting traded in a lot, it means that our customers, people who enjoy shopping with us, independently made a decision at one moment in time that they wanted to buy the brand. Now, you might say, but if they traded it in, doesn't that mean that they got tired of it and therefore it isn't good? And I would say no, because a lot of people's appetite for watches are irrespective of quality. Their budget is high enough that they can't keep everything, and tough choices are often made because they want to be able to experience new things.
Mm.
If it was the type of person who bought 1 or 2 things, planned on keeping it in 10 years, got rid of it 3 months later, I mean, that almost never happens in trades. It's usually just because somebody got something, they loved it, they had their moment in the sun, and now they want something else. So that's number one sign. So if I notice, like, let's say, um, like 3 years ago, I started getting a lot of Parmigiani trades, and that made me look at the brand differently. I noticed people walking into the store wearing, Tonda GTs, where I hadn't really seen them much in 10 years. That's going to perk up my ears. So that's part of it. But a lot of it is, um, what do we think is fundamentally interesting and cool and not like other things that we have? What in their own way is a value proposition at any price point that's sort of interesting, and what is something that we would like, what we would enjoy, and do these people seem like fun people to work with?
Right.
Those are the general things we look for in a brand.
So when people trade in, is it with the notion that they are inherently getting obviously a new watch, I guess is the assumption?
Yeah, we don't really
Or
buy watches. We just take trades towards other watches.
so, but was the understanding that, oh, well, maybe I should be looking out for this brand to blow up because they obviously want the new version of that? Like, say, I'm trading in my old GTI and I'm getting a new GTI because I love the car. It's just there's 100,000 miles on the clock.
I don't think it's about mileage because watches don't, because a lot of the people that trade in these things don't really wear them that much as opposed to emotionally experience them.
I just mean as in like the newer thing, not necessarily because of wear, but because of, say, design, for example.
But sometimes but sometimes the design that like like people would trade in um watches not because the designs became out of date, but just because their time with it was sort of over. And sometimes those older designs are still, or something almost identical to it, are still in the current collection of those brands, and people and other people will enjoy seeing them and buying them new. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's just so counterintuitive, I guess, with the trade in versus this brand's about to blow up
Right.
prediction.
Um, but it has been very predictive.
Yeah.
So for instance, that's one of the reasons I knew that Grand Seiko was going to do amazing. I mean, here we are. We're in selling a lot of in 2011, a lot of Omegas, a lot of Zeniths, and suddenly, unlike the 5 years before, suddenly watch collectors that have been buying for us for years, suddenly they've had a snowflake for 2 years and they've had their time with it and they want to trade it in. Whereas we'd never seen that before. That
Mm,
made me think, really educated watch consumers are suddenly into Grand Seiko.
mm,
We should really consider that
right.
because it tells you. And then you get to, when people are talking about trading them in, you get to talk about their purchase experience and what they liked about it. And I think that's been really interesting, an interesting way to gauge what we would do well with. And if it
Yeah.
happens over and over and over again, then you realize that it's a compatible brand mix.
I really wanted to talk to you about the limited editions that you do.
Great. Yeah, let's talk about
And
limited editions. My
when
favorite thing to talk about.
well, that's great. When did they start? How did they start? Why did they start? The backstory behind those.
Okay. So, um, I think life is really good if you've got a little bit of competitive friendly rival. And in 2015, there was a store in Texas called Timeless Luxury. And they came out with a Nomos edition club called the Timeless Club. And I looked at this watch and it was great. It looked just like the other club editions, but it was this really dark blue dial. He took a size that I think had only been offered with a date and made it a non-date, which dropped the price point down. It was really clever. And I looked at this thing and I thought, why aren't we doing this?
Mm,
And um and this was before Hodinkee editions, I think. I think Hodinkee editions started happening, a couple of years later. Um, but we then had our 75th anniversary and we came out with two editions in 2015 for the 75th 75th anniversary of Topper. One was a Vermont and one was a Nomos. And at the time, they were very like self-referential to us because I thought, well, if we did a limited edition, it should have like something to do with us and our anniversary. And ultimately, I mean, though those watches sold out, I realized that that was a mistake and that it's more interesting just to create watches that sort of stand on their own, that aren't related to design cues about us.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been something that I've looked to do since then. So taking on themes and making sure that if it said topper edition anywhere, it was very, very subtle, like on the back, because I
Right.
want the watches to sort of stand on their own.
How do you decide on how many to do, or is that determined by the collaborator?
That is always an interesting open discussion. Um, I have a joke about that the last thing you want to do is trip on your theme. So there's a brand that I will name, Glasuta Original, that came out with an anniversary watch of the CQ in 2019, and they made 69 steel pieces of this watch that had these amazing. It was like it's a steel $10,000 watch that had this really cool loom on the hands, and nobody could get one. It was like six of them ended up in the U.S. and they were in why 69 because the watch came out in 1969. It sounded great. Um, so you can end up sort of getting romanced in your quantity to have to do with your theme, and that can have bad um bad indications. Like we did that on a topper Oris when we did the maxi. We did I think um we were imagining um the watch in the 60s, and we did a count in the 160s. And I think um ultimately we sold it out, but if we had kept to a lower number, we would have sold it out super fast.
Mm.
um so my goal in limited edition numbers, knowing what I know now, having done a lot of watches, is I want the watches to sell out. I want people who buy them to enjoy them, and if a year or two later they want to get rid of them, um, they can get their their money out of them without an issue. I want people to feel that they're special, and I don't want to overproduce. That's if I'm not sure if I should make 20 or 30, we make 20. If I'm not sure if it's 100 or 200, it's 100.
I like that. So how many LEs have you done in the last 8 years?
Um, that's a good question. I think when we announced the Helios, we announced it as I think our 12th limited edition,
Okay.
but that doesn't account for multiple dials, which sometimes happen. So for instance, the fears we did was there was a white dial and a black dial, and a lot of energy went into making them different, but I think we counted that as one limited edition.
I see.
um when we did the Zodiac, we had the second series of the Zodiac had three dials that all came out at the same time, but
Mm.
that was like series two, so we counted that as one watch. So I think it's
Gotcha.
like 12 watches and maybe 17 unique pieces, I think.
So a little over one a year. Is that a cadence that you're looking to keep up?
We have three planned for this year.
Oh, cool.
We had one last year. A lot of these things are like, I don't think about the cadence as much as having them come out when they're ready.
It's just lead time. Yeah.
Like the Helios that we started working on, we started working on that like 4 years ago,
Oh, cool.
and it just, because of COVID and some production challenges, and Jason using different suppliers, it ended up taking a lot longer than we thought.
Hmm.
And then other watches, like there's a limited edition that we're working on now to come out in November that I mean, I feel like everything's been like super on time, as you would imagine a watch, you know,
100%. Yeah.
a watch to be.
TikTok. Yeah.
So but it just, but there could be a slip between the release time and that. So who's to say?
Is there any sort of like limited edition or brand that you carry in general that's maybe closer to your heart than another? Not because the others are like less so, but like, is there something that you particularly gravitate towards?
Um,
What are you wearing right now?
I'm wearing a Blancpain.
Okay.
I'm wearing a titanium 50 fathoms.
That's sick.
um,
Let's just call it what it is. That's awesome.
I don't wear it that much. It's a very it's I don't know. I was feeling
Sprightly.
sprightly today. That's right. Um, oh no, I feel, in some ways, I feel really strong about brands like Omega that have been with me my whole watch journey, and I also feel really strong about like brands like Fears, where, I you know in my mind the brand didn't even exist until 4 years ago when I met Nicholas. I had no idea what it was until I was staring at his collection, in my store, in a box, looking at these reissues of watches that were, from the 30s and 40s that his company had produced.
Yeah.
I think it's just about the friendships, the experiences. I, I, I mean, in terms of the watches I wear the most, I, I try to get watches from almost every brand
Yeah.
we feature and wear them.
Sure.
But I probably wear Omega the most. Grand Seiko, I wear a lot.
Do you engrave your watches ever?
Never, 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 never. The thought of
Okay.
engraving a watch just gives me anxiety.
Really?
Yeah,
Because it's stuck in that moment in time or what?
right. Which is unique from the watch.
Right.
So,
That's interesting. What do you look for in a watch when buying one? Like, what are you drawn to I don't know, are you a font guy? Are you a two hand guy? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you have rules or is it just, wow, that looks cool?
no, I don't think about it.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I don't think about it. I have no agenda or plan.
Right.
And when it comes to creating limiteds, the most important thing is, you know, what could we make that doesn't really exist right now, that is sort of, there are three things I look for. Um, I want it to be some kind of a historical or brand tie-in. I want it to um, have some kind of a modern, just a modern take that's like a
Mm-hmm.
nitpick,
Yeah.
and then I want it to have a twist. So those are the three things that I look for in all of our limiteds. I could probably come up with, all something like that for all of them.
Is there a brand that you don't carry, but you'd really like to, but can't because of, say, proximity to another retailer or something? What would be the one brand that you would hit up most, like fastest?
Um, I think that I think if you look at our pre-owned site, you'll notice one brand that we have tons of trade-ins, tons and tons and tons, that the answer will present itself to anyone who looks.
Got it.
I don't think a lot about the brands that we don't have. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much to do with what we
Right.
do have. It
Yeah.
just, you know,
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
yeah.
Or you don't have time to do it. So,
I'm just, like I said, we're trying to help the person on the phone, help the person in the
right.
store, and get the repair taken care of. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's the most important thing.
And I'm very well aware of that. So again, thank you for taking the time to do the podcast
Oh
because I know
God.
there's probably better things you could be doing with your
No,
time. But
I really wanted to do the podcast.
no, I really do appreciate it. It's awesome. Um, which, as a brief aside, by the way, I'm coming back through your neighborhood in about a week and a half. So if you're around, would love to see you. Um, but you guys recently moved into a new space. Well, I mean, I say recently. Remind me, how long have you been in the current
Almost
space?
a year, July.
Okay, yeah. All right, so it's been a year. What was that just natural growth? We want a bigger footprint, or was it like our lease is up? let's just take advantage of the opportunity to go elsewhere? Like, how did that come about, the new space?
Okay. So just to lay a little groundwork, the topper that existed that most people have walked into was built in the early 90s, and it was like a 1,500 square foot store with a 3,000 foot, or maybe a 1,500 square foot office on top of it and some offices in the back. So everything was super like cramped. Like we had like almost $500,000 of Blancpain inventory under, a 3 foot case of glass with each one right next to the other one. All of our Breitlings were like in 6 feet of space. It wasn't a good opportunity to show all of the brands that we have as they're meant to be shown.
Yeah.
Amazingly, in the pandemic, we didn't fall into the river. It felt like we were going to on the first day, but things
Sure.
went reasonably well during the pandemic. And what happened was the Gap had the best space on Burlingame Avenue. They're right in the intersection of two major cross streets. Um, and they had this huge red for lease sign. We had the opportunity to upgrade our status with Omega, to have an Omega boutique. And we had thought about initially getting a small store next to the existing store. And I just remembered one day looking at that big for lease sign, thinking about the future, walking over there with my brother and saying, why not this? Like, why don't we put the Omega boutique in the front of it and build the store we've always wanted? And we added a few brands since we moved, yes. But it really wasn't about that, because what we had so outpaced the physical space, that just getting what we had, with proper build outs, was really the main objective of the new space. Um, what did you think of it when you saw it?
I mean, it's beautiful. It obviously looks new. I mean, I saw it, when was that? April, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've only worked for brands that were like a single brand boutique. You're a multi brand boutique. Do brands assist in the build out to present their brand with you, like as a partner in that sense? Or are you guys
Absolutely,
out on your
absolutely,
own? Yeah.
absolutely. And that was one of the great challenges of the project, uh, was the brands, working with the different architects of the brands, in getting CAD drawings of the sections of the different brands from the brands, and also having it aesthetically look good with our case line. And so like when we chose the decoration, the biggest thing about that store is we didn't want it to look like a NASCAR car, where
Right.
like everywhere you looked you would just see like a different
Branding.
sticker or different
Yeah.
brand. And so the cases that are the topper cases were specifically chosen in like the way the walls are, the wood framing on top of the brands framing, everything was chosen in a way to try to have it tied together, so when you walked around you would almost ask that question of, where does topper begin and where does the brand end. So
Yeah.
that was one of the goals of the build out, was trying to make, you know, the transition from Grand Seiko, and you turn the corner and it's Glasuta Original flowing into Blancpain and then Moser. You want it to look as good as possible.
Yeah.
That was one of the great transitions, or the great goals. There's a store that I don't want to name, but my brother always talked about what he didn't want it to be, which felt like, it felt like, like a crane came in and just loaded every single brand shop and shop one right next to the other. And when you looked in the store, you didn't even see a store. All you saw were shop and shops. But
Interesting.
and like the identity of the store was just, you walked in and they're the shop and shops. So we really wanted it to feel like a specific place, and that's one of the reasons why we put like, we put in a bar and we put in a skylight right over the bar so people could see things in different lighting, in natural light. So lighting was really important in building that store, and that was
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we chose it. The space was because of how good the natural light was and how high the ceilings were.
Yeah. Topper definitely does not look like a flea market, for the record. So well done. Um, this is a question I commonly ask, but how has fatherhood changed you?
um, that's a really good question. Um, I'd say that there's certainly times when, like, I would never leave the store at 3:30 on a Friday, but if I was coaching Little League, I I somehow did. So I think that it allowed me to carve out experiences for for my kids that I would never take for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that it gave me a chance to sort of experience things that I wouldn't allow myself to experience otherwise.
Right.
And to a certain extent, it's, given me a little bit of dreaming about seeing if I can find somebody to take over someday.
Right. Yeah.
Which
That's
is a
cool.
touchy thing because you don't want to build you don't want to pigeonhole your kids into having their life be dominated by something if that's not what they want it to be. That's
Right.
that's one of but you also have your hopes.
Sure.
So I think, and that's just a general parenting question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have kids?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
How do you think kids could change standard age?
Well, they could pack up some boxes for one. Um,
They could
yeah.
stamp some bank
The
invoices.
yeah, the labor would be nice. Um, yeah, that's funny. Do you collect anything else other than watches?
um, my son collects Legos.
Cool.
I am the financial backer of the Lego collection.
Shocker.
And so I would go so far as to say that I collect Legos because I've spent a lot of money on Legos in the last 2 years.
What's been the most recent purchase
Um,
of Lego?
but I'm going to answer a different question, which is the most watched tie-in question Lego purchase because it's
Okay.
funniest. But then I'll answer
Okay.
most recent. Most recent is Moss Eisley Space Station. So I got him the huge 3,000 piece Moss Eisley Space Station. But we have the bonsai tree, the Lego bonsai tree.
Yeah.
Two versions of it. One version of it has the pink orchids and frogs, and the other version of it is more regular bonsai tree. Guess where that bonsai tree is right now?
I don't know. Behind your computer.
No, it's on a shelf in the Grand Seiko Salon.
Oh, sick. That's great.
Yeah,
That's so
it
great.
was a big hit at our Grand Seiko event we just had.
Well, you have that. Isn't that? Don't you have like a toy store like not far from you?
Yeah,
Like,
that's the one.
yeah, 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 yeah. Right, right.
Yeah,
They have those like really realistic looking stuffed animals. They look like real
very
dogs.
realistic.
Yeah.
Yes.
I told my wife, I was like, the only way we're getting a dog is if we get one of those stuffed animals and just have him in the corner by the front door. So you could like every time you come home, it's like he just greets you there. It'd be great.
How did you take that?
She was like, thought it was really weird. And
So is she the one that's pulling for the real dog?
no, not really. I mean, we kind of both want one, but we both don't want the responsibility,
Yeah,
you know? So we're like, if and when we have a kid is probably when we'll get a dog because it's all over, you know?
yeah, it's over.
So, yeah.
Enjoy it while you can.
Yeah,
This
100%.
dog kidless freedom.
Right. uh, what have you done recently for the first time?
Oh, yeah, I know what I did recently. Um, I went lake. I went. lake fishing and on Tahoe and got up at 5 in the morning to watch the sunrise in Tahoe
Sick.
last week with my brother and my wife and a visiting topper guest who was there for the GS9 event we just had.
Oh, amazing.
We were out on the water at like 5 in the morning, um, and trying to pull in some lake trout.
What's the boat? What were you on?
Like um just a standard 6-person canopied fishing boat. I can't tell you the
Okay.
model. I can tell you the
Okay.
captain. He was great. His name was
Right.
Daniel Salvador.
Okay. Oh, so you rented a boat.
Captain Salvador. Yeah, we
Okay.
Captain Salvador took care of getting us on the fish.
Gotcha.
He
Yeah.
had all
Okay.
the equipment. We went in different parts of the lake where he thought would be good spots. And we pulled up some fish.
Sorry, what were you fishing for? What kind of fish?
Uh Lake trout.
Lake trout.
That's
Interesting.
apparently all that there really is in
Oh.
Tahoe.
Oh, is that right? I know nothing about what's under the water in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah. But I
That's
really
cool.
wanted to I really wanted to be out on the lake and watch the sunrise. That was as valuable as the little 2 pounders we caught. But it was
Yeah.
it was fun.
I bet that was incredible. Um,
Guess what
what
the
was
lake record is for biggest fish caught?
of lake trout? 14 pounds.
I'm not sure it was a lake trout.
Oh,
Apparently somebody caught like a 30 plus pound fish out of Tahoe, and Captain Salvador said that he himself had reeled in a 22-pound fish.
oh my gosh.
So there's some beasts.
Well, I know. I mean that lake's got to be really deep, but
Yeah.
yeah. Wow, 30-pound fish.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is a record.
I have a photo here on my desk of when I was 11 years old on Lake Okeechobee in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and I caught an 11-pound, 5-ounce largemouth bass.
Oh, nice.
Um, I was a very late bloomer as it is, so at 11, I was probably the size of an 8-year-old,
Uh-huh.
and this fish almost pulled me off the boat. Like it was crazy, and so I can only imagine what a 30-pound fish trying to reel that in. I mean, you see the videos of like sailfish and marlin and all that stuff, but like as far as a lake is concerned, not an ocean, like that's a different story.
Yeah.
That's nuts. What was your first car?
My first car was a Merkur XR4TI.
And how long did we have this car?
I had it from 88 or 89 until 91. It had an unceremonious end.
What happened?
A Ford F-250.
Oh no. You were okay though, obviously.
Yeah, I was okay.
That's
The
good.
Ford
The car.
F-250 was good too.
Yeah, yeah.
Whole front.
Oh my
Not so
god.
good.
What's the daily driver now? What are you driving?
Um, I drive the most common incognito car that you can drive in Burlingame, which is a Tesla.
Oh god, yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And if you look for it in the parking lot, it's next to the other 16 Tesla Ys.
Is yours white or black?
How dare you? How could you make an assumption like that? It's white. Um,
Well, Rob, this has been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. Like I said, I need to come by and visit. Like I said, in the next couple of weeks, would love to stop in.
yeah, that'd be great.
Um, and if is happy hour doable for you or no? You got to get home.
We can have happy hour in the store. We'll pour one out. We'll
Done.
sit you up at the bar and we'll pour you whatever you want.
And we'll pour one out for what's the brand that's no more that you were saying?
Sector. Too
Sector.
many
Yeah.
limits.
Too many limits. Rest in peace, Sector.
I don't do a lot of podcasts, but
Yeah, I
I
know.
but what I heard about what your interview style would be like would be just don't it will go where it goes. And so I appreciated that.
Who told you that? I'm curious. I got to know.
Well, I'll tell you off the air.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. That's cool. Um,
but I really liked it. So I haven't done a ton of podcasts, but I can tell you that none sounded like this.
well, speaking of podcasts, I totally forgot to ask you.
You
Did
did? What'd you forget?
didn't you start a podcast recently?
I sure did.
Well, do you want to talk about it?
I sure do. I co-host it with Zach Pena.
And what's it about?
It's called Burlingame Park.
Okay.
Burlingame Park is the intersection of Topper Jewelers.
Mind blowing.
And we have 6 episodes we've done so far. We did one with Jason Lim of Helios, who almost never does podcasts, talking about our Helios limited edition. We just did one with Joe Kirk, the curator of Grand Seiko. We did one with VJ from Wind Up SF, where I saw you, talking about the Kermit.
Love VJ.
We try to talk about. He's been a guest on this pod. I saw.
Yeah.
So we try to talk about episodes about stories or items that are interesting to, I think, the Topper audience, or just stories from Topper that are interesting. I think that's sort of what the podcast is mainly about.
Sure.
But we're it's a new discovery, so we're all just sort of figuring it out. I have a question for you if we're talking about podcasts. So
Yeah.
what episode are you on right now?
Um. Well, Zach Pena actually is number 110, which releases next week.
Okay.
And then I've got you and Gabe in the hopper, so 112.
Okay. So
You'll be 111, I think.
okay. So that's so funny that that you did the co-hosts of Burlingame Park back to back. So I guess my biggest question for you that I bet your readers would find interesting was, so you're now over 100 episodes in. How has it changed from what you thought it would be when you started?
I think I feel like it's far less about business than it is about people now. I think when I launched it, it was about the stories about entrepreneurship,
Okay.
and it sort of became stories about entrepreneurs,
Okay.
like their backgrounds. What do you drive? Like, let's get to know you in a way that nobody else is going to get to know you, because if you're on another podcast, they're going to ask you about the history of Topper and blah, blah, blah,
Uh-huh.
which hopefully I did it in a different way. Right. So
Yeah, sure.
that's kind of not only how it changed, but why it's changed. So some of it was very cognizant, and then others hasn't been. But I would say that's the biggest change that I can speak to. I don't know. Maybe the listeners could tell you better than I can, honestly,
Yeah.
because I'm sort of along for the ride. I'm not, outside the box. I'm in it.
And do you feel like it's caused the brand standard age to change at all?
No, it won't. No, it hasn't caused the brand to change. I think if
You
anything,
learned have you learned things from the podcast and the in doing all of these podcasts that have maybe influenced your design?
no, absolutely not. No, it hasn't affected design. It maybe operationally, but not design. There's nothing creative that I've drawn from other people, because well, first of all, that's copycatting, and I don't really want to do that. But um, but that's a really good question. But
You
the
can
answer
have
is no.
inspiration without copycatting.
Sure, no, you can be inspired, right? But I don't think there's anything creatively borrowed from the podcast. I think it's been more of a mindset. I think it's been more of an operational sense, things of that nature, which has been helpful. Um, but no, yeah, nothing too creative that I can think of. I think if anything I've talked about on the podcast before is the things that people tell me I should design and I do never sell. It's just coincidental. Call it a coincidence or just a byproduct. I'm not sure, but
So
yeah.
my plan for cat themed automotive onesies. I should probably not get into that in too much detail.
Yeah, we should probably put a button in that one.
All right, sounds good.
Rob, I'll see you in a couple weeks, man.
All right, take care.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.
Okay, buddy.
Thanks for having
Chat
me.
with you soon. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. This wraps up this episode of the Standard Age podcast. If you like what you heard, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend or two. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the show as it helps others discover these episodes. It absolutely helps far more than you realize. Shout out to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.